Emily sat alone in the dimly lit living room, her fingers gripping a glass of wine as she stared at the clock. It was past midnight. Again, the silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the wooden floor. Daniel had told her he had a late meeting, but she knew better. Meetings didn't leave the scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirts. Her phone vibrated on the table. A message from her best friend, Claire. "Any news?" Emily hesitated before replying. "Not yet. But I know he's lying." She took a deep breath, closing her eyes, willing herself not to cry. She had loved Daniel for 10 years, built a life with him, and yet, here she was, questioning everything. Across town, Daniel was lying in a bed that wasn't his arm draped over Sophia's bare shoulder. The hotel room smelled of expensive cologne and the lingering scent of their passion. Sophia traced lazy circles on his chest, her lips curving into a satisfied smile. "You always leave so soon," she murmured. Daniel sighed, shifting onto his side. "You know I can't stay." She propped herself up on one elbow, watching him. "Have you thought about what I asked?" He avoided her gaze, pretending to be distracted by his watch. "Sophia." She sat up, the sheets slipping down her body. "You keep saying you want more with me, but you never act on it. When will you leave her?" He hesitated, then leaned in to kiss her. "Soon," he whispered against her lips. But they both knew it was a lie. Meanwhile, Sophia's phone buzzed on the nightstand. She picked it up, her expression shifting as she read the message. "Where are you?" It was from Mark. Her stomach twisted. She had promised him she'd be home hours ago. Deleting the message, she turned her attention back to Daniel. Guilt flickered in her chest, but only briefly. Mark paced in his apartment, gripping his phone. Sophia's lies were becoming more frequent, and deep down, he knew why. His jaw clenched as he tossed his phone onto the couch. He had no right to be angry, not when he was keeping secrets of his own. His mind drifted to Olivia, their stolen moments, the thrill of secrecy. He should have ended it, but he couldn't. At that moment, Olivia was slipping into a cab, checking her reflection in the window. Her pulse quickened. The night with Mark had been reckless, dangerous, and everything she craved. As she approached her house, she took a deep breath, rehearsing the lies she would tell Jacob. Jacob was already asleep when she crept into their bedroom. She slid under the covers carefully, her back to him. He stirred, mumbling in his sleep, reaching for her. She let him hold her but kept her eyes open, staring at the dark ceiling, trapped between guilt and desire. Emily sat across from the private investigator, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. A thin folder lay between them, untouched but heavy with unspoken truths. The man cleared his throat. "I followed him for 3 nights," he said. "He's meeting someone at the Carlton Hotel. Same room, same woman." Emily exhaled slowly, her stomach twisting. She had prepared for this, but hearing it out loud made it real. She reached for the folder with trembling hands and flipped it open. Photos. Daniel and Sophia. Her husband pressing another woman against a wall, his lips at her throat. A blurry shot of them entering a hotel room. Emily shut the folder, pushing it away as bile rose in her throat. "Do you want more evidence?" the investigator asked. "No," she whispered. "This is enough." At that moment, Daniel was sitting in his car outside the hotel, staring at his phone. He should go inside. Sophia was waiting. Instead, he scrolled through old photos of Emily, of their life before the lies. His finger hovered over her name, the urge to call her nearly overwhelming. But then a message from Sophia popped up. "Are you coming up?" He pocketed his phone and stepped out of the car. Upstairs, Sophia paced the hotel room, her patience wearing thin. She wanted more from Daniel, but she also knew he would never leave Emily. Still, she wasn't ready to let him go. A knock at the door. She composed herself before opening it. "You're late," she said, feigning annoyance. Daniel kissed her in response, and for now that was enough. Meanwhile, Mark sat at a bar, nursing his drink, his mind elsewhere. Sophia had lied to him again, and he knew exactly where she was. He should be angry, but all he felt was exhaustion. He glanced at his phone, debating whether to call her. Instead, he texted Olivia. "Are you free?" She replied almost instantly. "Meet me at our usual place." He downed the rest of his drink and left. Olivia locked the bathroom door, her hands shaking. She wasn't afraid of Mark, she was afraid of getting caught. Jacob had started asking questions. He wasn't stupid. She had to be careful. But when Mark touched her, she forgot about everything else. Jacob sat in their bedroom, staring at Olivia's phone on the nightstand. It had lit up twice in the past 5 minutes. His instincts screamed at him to look. Instead, he turned off the light and lay back, pretending to sleep. He would find out the truth soon enough. Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of her. Daniel walked in, adjusting his tie, acting as if everything was normal. She studied him, wondering how long he had been perfecting his lies. "You got home late," she said, keeping her tone even. "Meeting ran over," he replied casually, reaching for his coffee. She watched him sip it, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. He doesn't even flinch. The images from the private investigator's folder flashed in her mind, but she swallowed her anger. Not yet. Sophia stood in front of Mark's apartment door, debating whether to knock. He had been distant, avoiding her calls. She knew why. She had seen the way he looked at her lately, like he knew. With a deep breath, she knocked. When Mark opened the door, his expression was unreadable. "What do you want, Sophia?" She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Are you mad at me?" He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Should I be?" She hesitated. "I don't know what you mean." Mark scoffed. "Don't insult me." He pulled out his phone, swiped through his photos, and turned the screen toward her. A picture of her and Daniel. Same hotel, different night. "How long?" Sophia's stomach dropped. "Mark." "How long?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the air. She lowered her gaze. "A few months." He let out a bitter laugh. "And you let me believe it was just us?" "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. Mark shook his head, stepping back like he couldn't stand to be near her. "You already did." Meanwhile, Olivia sat in her car outside Jacob's office, gripping the steering wheel. He had been watching her more closely, his questions becoming more pointed. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep up the lies. Her phone buzzed. "Mark. I need to see you." She exhaled shakily before typing, "Not now." Another message. "Then when?" She didn't reply. Jacob watched Olivia from his office window, narrowing his eyes as she drove away. Something wasn't right. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Hey," he said when the line connected. "I need a favor." Emily placed the folder on the dining table, right in front of Daniel. He glanced at it, then at her, confusion flickering across his face before realization set in. "What is this?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Open it." He hesitated before flipping it open. The color drained from his face as he scanned the photos. For the first time in years, Emily saw something she hadn't seen before: fear. "I can explain," he started. She let out a cold laugh. "Explain what?" "How you've been sneaking off to hotels with her. How you lied to my face." Daniel shut the folder and ran a hand over his face. "Emily, please. Do you love her?" He hesitated, and that moment of silence was all the answer she needed. Sophia sat in her apartment, staring at her phone. Mark hadn't called again, hadn't even tried to argue. Just silence. She didn't know if that was better or worse. Then a knock at the door. She opened it to find Mark standing there, his expression unreadable. "Let me guess," she said. "You came to yell at me some more?" "No," he said flatly. "I came to say I'm done." She blinked. "Done?" "You and Daniel deserve each other," he said. "I'm done being an option." Before she could respond, he walked away, leaving her standing there, hollow and exposed. Olivia sat at the kitchen counter, her leg bouncing anxiously. Jacob had been acting strange all day, watching her too closely, his questions more direct. She had a feeling the walls were closing in. Her phone buzzed. A message from Mark. "We need to talk." Before she could reply, Jacob entered the room, His gaze locked on her. Who is it? Her breath hitched. Just a friend. Jacob stepped closer, his expression unreadable. Which friend? She forced a smile. Why are you suddenly so interested in my phone? Because I know you're lying, he said, voice dangerously calm. Her heart pounded. Jocko. He pulled out his own phone, tapping the screen a few times before setting it on the counter. A picture stared back at her. Her. Mark. Together. She felt the floor drop beneath her. Jacob's voice was quiet but firm. Tell me the truth, Olivia. Daniel sat in the dimly lit living room, his head in his hands. Emily hadn't spoken to him in hours. She had left the house without telling him where she was going, and now he was drowning in silence. His phone buzzed on the table. Sophia. He let it ring. A second later, a text followed. I need to see you. He deleted it without replying. Emily sat across from a lawyer, her hands clasped together tightly. The papers in front of her felt heavier than she expected. She had spent years building a life with Daniel, and now she was about to destroy it. Are you sure? The lawyer asked. She hesitated, but then she remembered the photos, the lies, the empty apologies. She nodded. Yes. Sophia stood outside Daniel's office, waiting. She had tried calling, texting, but he was ignoring her. When the door finally opened, he barely looked at her. I told you not to come here, he said. She crossed her arms. You're shutting me out now. Daniel exhaled sharply. Emily knows. Sophia's stomach twisted. What does that mean? It means I have to fix this. She scoffed. Fix what? Your marriage? You don't love her, Daniel. He looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw it, the regret, the realization that this wasn't just a game anymore. I don't know what I want, he admitted. That was all she needed to hear. Without another word, she turned and walked away. Mark sat alone in a bar, staring at the amber liquid in his glass. He had lost both women in the span of a day. Sophia was never his to begin with, and Olivia, that was a mistake he wished he could undo. His phone buzzed. A message from Olivia. I messed up. He didn't reply. Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, watching Jacob pack his bag. He hadn't yelled, hadn't even cried. He had just accepted the truth and decided to walk away. Please don't do this, she whispered. Jacob zipped up his suitcase. You already did. And just like that, he was gone. Daniel arrived home to find Emily sitting in the living room, the divorce papers on the table between them. She didn't look angry anymore, just tired. This is what you want, he asked. She met his gaze, her voice steady. It's what I need. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I'm sorry. She gave him a small, sad smile. Me too. In the end, love wasn't enough. Lies had taken root, and now there was nothing left to save.